Welcome to Diversity Conversations, where we engage in thought-provoking dialogue to identify leadership solutions to today's most challenging conflicts. Stream live each week, Saturday 9:30 a.m. to 11 a.m., hosted by Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Strategist and CEOs Eric Ellis and Tommy Lewis. Join us and add your voice to this engaging diversity conversation.
Good morning, Greater Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky, the United States, and the world. My name is Eric Ellis, and I'm the president and CEO of Integrity Development Corporation. And I'm usually joined by my good friend and brother, Tommy Lewis. But as you can see, he's not here. Tommy is doing a retreat with his company, and he's not going to be able to join us today. But we have an amazing guest that we're going to bring up this morning later on. Roshan Kindred. She is the Chief Diversity Officer at PageDuty. And so we're looking forward to having that conversation. I just had a sort of opening conversation with her, and boy, you're in for a treat this morning. I'm by myself, but I'm never alone. And so I've got some things that I'd like to share. Instead of talking about how my week was, because Tommy's not here, we can't talk together. I'm going to sort of set the foundation, if you will, for this conversation by sharing with you, the title that we have for the conversation today is Exploring the DEIB Forecast and Relevance. As you all know, that's the focus of the work that Tommy and I do. I am proud to announce to you all this morning, I don't know, Lydia, if you saw it, but in, Diversity Conversations has been ranked third in the top 100 diversity and inclusion podcasts around the world. And I was like, whoa, look at that, man. And so Tommy and I are like blown away, man. We didn't even know there was a ranking of something like that. So we are thrilled, and we want to thank you, our community, for watching us, viewing us, and really helping to push us to a place where we are ranked number 3 among the top 100 D&I podcasts in the world. And we're excited about that. But as we look at exploring the DEIB forecast and relevance, here's some things I think are important for you to consider. Oftentimes when I talk to inclusion subject matter experts, they're frustrated because they believe that nobody really values inclusion enough, DEI enough, DEIB or DEIA. They believe that we're oftentimes the stepchildren of organizational initiatives. Well, I've got news for you. The people landscape is challenging in general. Gallup did some research of full-time workers around the globe, and they discovered that of full-time workers around the globe, 85% don't like their jobs and 75% don't like their bosses. They also discovered that in the typical organization, only 10% of managers are great, 20% are good, and 70% are mediocre to poor. We know right now that in the year 2024, that over 50% of the workforce is actively looking for another job. So I would say to you, in many ways, organizations are struggling to create people-centered workplaces in general. And that's something I think that's important for us to take note of. I oftentimes ask people, what's the number one diversity issue in the workplace? Anytime I go to give a keynote speech or work with a new client, and they start brainstorming things like, classism or racism or sexism or unconscious bias. I say, no. The number one diversity issue in the workplace is the one that affects you. And for those of us that are leading in this space, if you don't understand that, I think there's a significant miss that you may have with your audiences. I know that every time that I give a keynote address, people are listening for the first, couple minutes, trying to determine who I am. Am I conservative? Am I liberal? Am I, culturally informed? Am I an Uncle Tom? I mean, they're listening to determine where they think I am, to determine whether they're going to listen to the rest of what I have to say. And what I recognize is that the number one issue for people is the one that affects them. And so at the end of the day, you're going to have to ultimately get at the things that affect people themselves within organizations. As we look at sort of the inclusion wheel and DEIB, I would say to you that this wheel is something that I put together 20 years ago. It's an adaptation. For those of you that know me, you know that I've been working in this space for 33 years. And so many people consider me a pioneer in the field of diversity. We've worked with organizations as different as the CIA. That's the first place that I started doing this work. We trained spies. During that time, I thought my job was to be a diversity ghostbuster, going to organizations and gun down the racist, sexist, bigoted homophobes. You know, that's what I thought my job was. I literally would lose. I had a formula. I was going to lose a third of the class because I was going to name call them, you know, them racist, sexist. A third of the class was going to be on the fence, like, I'm not sure if this guy's crazy or sane. But the third that I won over, I felt like they were going to change the world. And then I got called, you know, my faith is important to me. And I felt like I got called to the principal's office. And God was asking me, like, Eric, why are you losing so many people? I said, well, Lord, I'm just doing your work. He said, well, that's not the work I called you to, not to divide people or to name call them or blame and shame them. And so I transformed my style from one of blaming and shaming to one of being more transparent around my own biases, because I believe that bias is a human condition. And then secondly, trying to create environments that were psychologically safe. Because what I believe is that when you create environments that are psychologically safe, people are longing to have an authentic conversation. What I've learned is that when you stop chasing people, they stop running. And I've also discovered that when you fight for people, they join your team. And so this inclusion wheel says that, the people who sort of put together the first wheel was Marilyn Loden and Judy Rosner. They came up with sort of the primary and secondary dimensions of diversity. I expanded that to the 3 dimensions of diversity being personal, social, and organizational. A lot of this work comes out of the work that my father did. People, like I say, call me a pioneer, but my father is one of the fathers of this industry. Many people credit his firm for coining the term diversity. That's how far back we go. And so this wheel says that there are these 3 dimensions of diversity, that all of us are a unique configuration of these characteristics and traits. In each of these boxes, there are dominant culture traits. Those are traits that have more power and privilege. And there are non-dominant culture traits, those that have less power and privilege. So if in this country, sort of being a male is a dominant culture trait, being female or non-binary is a non-dominant culture trait. That means men have sometimes more power and privilege. Being an extrovert is a dominant culture trait. It has more power and privilege. Being an introvert is a non-dominant culture trait. Being white is a dominant culture trait. Being a person of color is a non-dominant culture trait. In this country, being a Christian is a dominant culture trait. Being another religious belief or agnostic is a non-dominant culture trait. So you understand, you could literally map yourself out on this wheel. And what you would discover is that all of us are a unique configuration of this wheel. None of us wakes up privileged every day, and none of us wakes up a victim every day. We are a combination of privileged and sometimes being included. If you see these terms that we talk about now, DEIB, diverse, equitable, inclusive, belonging, these terms, in my view, they relate to all of us. All of us are unique. We want to be able to bring our authentic selves to work. We want our talents, skills, abilities, potential to be meaningfully included. And then how many of you know that when I bring something to the workplace that makes a difference, I want to be equitably recognized and rewarded? And then at the end of the day, all of us, all people want to have this sort of sense of belonging. Now, why are some attacking DEIB? And our guest is probably going to be able to weigh in on this with her own perspective. But I think that sometimes when it is ineffectively delivered, then people may attack. Some people are attacking DEIB because it's being ineffectively delivered. When people feel excluded, they will tend to attack DEI and DEIB. When what's in it for me, WIIFM, what's in it for me is unclear. When there is political value to be gained, then people will attack this work. When people are unaware of DEIB's value, in the workplace, they may attack it. And when there are conscious or unconscious biases, when those exist, then sometimes people will attack this work. I believe, I'll go back to this, that to be, I wrote a book, Diversity Conversations. That's what the podcast is named after. And I have a chapter in there, chapter 6, that talks about being a diversity critical thinker, being able to understand, recognize the significance of issues that are different than what you think or believe. So understanding, recognizing the legitimacy of perspectives that are different than the one that you have. So for us in this space, we must understand some of the illegitimate attacks on DEI, but we also must understand and recognize some of the legitimate concerns that exist. I'll give you an example. Many of us were frustrated at the Supreme Court deciding to overturn affirmative action in our universities around the country. Basically, they said, we're going to start removing race as, something that people could use in order to make decisions on selecting students and their student populations. Here's what I think underlies some of what the Supreme Court has said. And I think that this is coming towards corporations right now. In many ways, the Supreme Court is saying, you can't have your cake and eat it too. In other words, what I've seen is that organizations have often been hesitant to embrace the structural isms and barriers that exist within their institutions. So they were hesitant to embrace the reality of bias, systemic and structural bias, but then they wanted to do DEI initiatives. So, so the court's almost saying, how are you going to justify a DEI focus if you're not making the real case for structural systemic issues? That's an oversimplification. But that's one of the things I think that corporate America has to deal with, is how do we ensure that we are studying ourselves well enough to understand what are some of those structural barriers that may be in place. Let's continue. I believe that fundamentally, inclusion is the only pathway to a successful future. In other words, I don't believe that DEIB has any credible opponents. That literally, if we're not trying to figure out how to create common ground, then we are basically leaving ourselves to the pointy end of the spear, and whoever has the biggest spear can win the day. I believe that it is DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, that is that pathway for us working together. I also believe that the workplace challenges everyone, and that at the end of the day, we know that, and I'm going to stop here, we know that the most effective educators educate to the individual learner. I would say to you that those of us that are practitioners in this space have to recognize that the organizations that we work with are a compilation of different groups, and within each of those groups are different individuals. And at the end of the day, we're going to have to customize our solutions so that they meet the needs of those individual groups and ultimately individuals within those groups. As I look at the forecast for and the relevance for DEIB, I think there are some challenges. I think that DEIB is on life supports in many ways because of the the unyielding political attacks that have been, sent towards DEI. I believe that the research says that the affinity group that feels the most discriminated against in the United States are white Americans. Now, for some of us, that's kind of shocking. But if they feel the most discriminated against, and they believe that DEI oftentimes is that weapon that's been used against them, you can see why there may be some difficulty there. I think that there's still strong relevance for this work. I think there's a strong business case, and our guest is going to certainly help us to make that. So without any further ado, we're going to bring to the stage Roshan Kindred.
Hello, hello. How are you, Eric?
I'm doing well, my sister. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. It's a chilly Saturday morning, but I'm super excited to be here and dig into this conversation.
Absolutely. And we are so proud to have you join us. There is so much that I'd like our community to hear from you. They join in, they make their comments. If they have questions for you, I'll bring those to the surface so that you can respond to those. I'd like you to start by just simply introducing yourself. Tell people a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and maybe the people and experiences that have shaped who you are today.
So my name is Roshan or Roshan Kindred. It actually is a Persian name. It means bright light. And my last name is Kindred. It means friendly spirit. So I tell people I am the bright light and friendly spirit to come into your day. I'm born and raised, born and raised in Northern California from Burlingame, very culturally homogeneous community that is predominantly white. So I grew up as one of 5 Black young ladies in my private school. So I had a very skewed look at what race looked like, but I had the opportunity to be amongst several different cultures. And so what I realized is that your experience is really shaped on yes, your skin color if you live in America, but it's also the culture that you're around. So I grew up amongst white America. I grew up amongst Armenians, and grew up with Filipino heritage, obviously Persian heritage from my aunts, and really had this like multi-universe experience in being a Black woman. I came to San Jose State to do my undergrad and realized that that experience was not the lived experience of people that look like me. And so I didn't have some of the cultural norms that people thought it meant to be Black, right? So I went on this quest to understand, like, what is it to be a Black woman in America? And why do I feel as a woman and a Black woman that I'm not fitting in? And what I realized, it came down to culture. And if you had exposure, you had different perspectives. If you were only grew up in your own hometown and never went anywhere outside of the United States, you had a very US centric mindset. However, if you have traveled to Europe, if you've traveled to Asia, if you traveled to the Middle East, all of that gets changed by your experiences. And so, I got into corporate America with this very, hopeful mindset of how do I bring myself, how do I create value, but also how do I bring that lived experience? Yes.
I'll just jump in every once in a while. So I just want to pivot back for just a second to your global travel, and then ask you, where does the United States rank in terms of this multicultural mindset, or sort of level of comfort for women of color? What have you seen in the United States versus other places that you've traveled?
So I just got back from Korea.
Okay.
Very different experience. So in Korea, it is predominantly a male-centric environment. I happened to be sitting on the subway. There was an older gentleman that came in. I went to get up. It's just a good example of the women to men dynamics. I got up because he was older. And in America, if you see someone that is older, you give age a deference. At least that's the way I was raised.
Right.
And I went to give up my seat, and he looked at me like, I don't want to sit there. So I said, oh, okay, I did what in my culture was the right thing to do.
Right.
He went across from me, and the woman had to be at least 80 years old. And she had bags, and he tapped her on the knee, and without even giving her eye contact, she got up, he sat down, and the train went on. And the first thing that came to my mind was that would not fly in the United States. But what I realized is that women in the Korean culture are seen as subpar. Now, that doesn't mean that there's a lack of disrespect, but that culturally, that the man is a dominant entity in Korea. And so when you grow up with that, and you then immigrate to the United States, you bring that into the United States. So you thinking that male is right, that a man should be in a position of power or authority, despite how they present themselves, despite what their belief systems are. I think you can see like why the trends in America are very different, because we are not homogeneous. We are inviting to all cultures to come in, but those cultures bring their culture in. And
Right.
so, when we look at that, it does help to shape our understanding that the U.S. isn't just the U.S. We're multicultural.
Right.
And, I think if you've traveled around the world, you can see that. I spent time in Kenya. When I went to Kenya, all I saw was opportunity. It was nothing but Black people, but I saw a plethora of opportunity. But when I talked to
What kind of
other
opportunity? You say you saw
Oh,
opportunity.
business opportunity.
Oh, yeah.
So I went on safari, right?
Okay.
So I'll never forget this. My safari tour guide, his name was Simon. He got, I think he said 30 shillings a month. That is, the dollar is 1,000 shillings. So you can understand he lived on $30 a month. And I just thought, how do you make it? I'm thinking, I go to Starbucks and spend,
Right.
$25 on
Right.
2 coffees and a sandwich.
Right.
And I thought to him, okay, so if someone gave you an investment and they bought you a truck, you did all
Mhm.
of the work. I know that I paid $500 to take this safari, but you did 100% of the touring. So if I gave you an investment and invested in getting you a truck, what
Ooh,
prevents you from
make
doing
a
this
killing.
yourself, right?
Yeah, make
Make
a
it
killing.
right
Right.
now you make $30 a
Right.
month
Right.
doing the same thing you could do making $500 a trip.
Right.
And he just could not understand that. And the first thing he said to me, and I was like, listen, a truck doesn't cost me anything. Like
Right.
I'm willing to sow into your life. You know what he
Right.
said? If I do it, then everyone else around me is going to take that idea. He could not see the opportunity. He could not, because society has
Right.
taught him to stay pigeonholed. Society
Right.
has not taught him to be an entrepreneur.
Let
That's
me ask
left
you
for
a
the
question.
leaders.
Right. So I'm going to ask you a question about the US, and then I'm going to pivot back to who are the people and experiences that have made you who you are today. I want to ask you a question that I've heard people say over the years that integration had one of the most negative impacts on Black people as it relates to entrepreneurship. And I can tell you that for years, I rejected that as
Mhm.
conspiracy thinking, and that why are we trying to act that, integration itself was a huge problem. But the more time has gone on, I've almost come around to that mindset in this regard. It's almost like when there was segregation, then we had to do everything because we weren't accepted or allowed to take advantage of all the other services that were available in mainstream white America. But now what I look at is that we sort of just folded up the tent on all of our businesses that existed in the community. And we've gone to the Walmarts and Kroger's, and we've gone to other places, and now we don't have those businesses. Do you see that that way, or do you think there's some kind of balance that should occur between being able to integrate but also remain entrepreneurial?
So I think there's a balance, right? Because you have to have diversity. I mean, if you're only serving the Black community, then or whatever community you represent, then you only represent but so much growth, but so much
Right,
opportunity. But when
right,
you have diversity, when you have multi-complex needs within your community that you have to serve, it makes your business greater. It makes you able to
totally agree
expand.
with that. Yeah,
I think the problem is passing down that education and passing down those experiences so you can continue to level up. You spoke about how your father was a pioneer in DEI work. That set the platform to then you become a pioneer. But if your
absolutely.
father never taught you what
Right,
he knew, you would never have become who you are. And I guarantee that your children are becoming things that you never even imagined you yourself could be.
absolutely, absolutely.
It's passing down that generational knowledge. And so I think what has happened primarily in the Black community is if you look at the history of slavery and how the Black family unit had been broken up, the language and the religion have been taken away, then you don't have that familiar lived experience being passed down and innovated upon. You just
Right.
have one generation starting over again and again. So you're one generation start.
Oh,
And it just becomes this systemic problem. So then you
Mm.
compound that with society that then is putting up additional barriers, and you find yourself not ever having a path, a strategic path on how you
Mm.
navigate forward. But then you have your outliers, your father, my father, someone else's father. It takes like this revolutionary activist mentality in order to break the barriers that have been set up
So,
for you. And
so
we
let me
all
ask you
can't be
that question.
activists.
Yeah, you are so interesting, girl. We're not gonna be able to get through all of this. I mean, we got already. But
Um,
let me ask you this. So for me, uh, part of my response to this most recent election is that we have to stop looking toward Washington for our answers, and we actually have to start looking toward one another and developing strategic alliances with not just Black people, but people of goodwill in order to make a difference. And yet, here's what I see in the world today, that we as a people, our response to inequity is to either complain, to protest, or to try to work harder. And I don't think you can get to equity through either any of those channels. You actually have to come up out of working hard by yourself, and you have to lock arms with other people of goodwill in order to figure out how we're going to support each other and make it together. And yet, we're living in a world right now where I believe that people are so busy, they're so burnt out, they're so exhausted that they don't have the time or the energy to develop those meaningful relationships. What is the prospect for us sort of partnering in meaningful ways towards our own self-interest?
I think the first thing is to address the fear you have. If you don't have the solution, if you don't address the fear, then you can't think of a solution. And what people
Ooh.
have done is look to social media to be entertained because they don't have a
Mm,
solution. When you think
mm.
about a revolutionary or a change
All right,
agent,
come on now.
they may not have the exact solution, but you know what? They're
Right,
not afraid to fail. They're not
right.
afraid to iterate. They're not afraid to innovate. That is how innovation comes about. You
Mm,
cannot stand still and go somewhere. And if you stand still, then you become part of the problem. And so what we have to do is figure out how we put one step in front of the other, not
mm,
being afraid to fall, and then bringing people along the way to say, hey, you know what? In everything that I bring to the table, my lived experience, I fail. What has your lived experience been? And again, it's demolishing the fear. We live in a scarcity mentality. We are moving ever so fast, but
come
when
on
you
now.
recognize that the world is fruitful, then you recognize that, you know what? I may
Mm,
not know what a banana tastes like, but I'm
mm,
going to go get a plantain because you know what? I'm going to innovate and say, it's just a banana. Maybe it's just sweeter. Maybe I'll try something
mm.
different. I'm going to expand my palate. I'm going to expand my intellect so I can expand my scope. And
All
I
right
think that
now.
that's what we have to do.
Let me so you know how I do community. Sometimes I gotta slow down the picture frame to
Mm-hmm,
make
mm-hmm,
sure that
mm-hmm,
we don't miss the message. So
mm-hmm,
what
mm-hmm.
the sister has just said to us, she says, do not be afraid to fall. Do not be afraid to fail. So that's one thing that we have to get as a mindset that says that I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid to fail because I know that me, my community, my God are more than enough to make it. So I want you to expound on, where did this mindset come from in you?
I think, having resilient parents, right? Having resilient parents that were willing to do what other people weren't, and that was move their kids to what they perceive to be a better environment. Because I come from older parents, and they thought that being in a more affluent, being in a more white environment would expose me to things that I would not otherwise be exposed to. But what my mother always said was, don't ever forget that you're Black.
That's
Don't
right.
ever forget where you come from, because I'm exposing you. I'm not taking you away. And I think that's the difference. She wanted us to have something that she thought wasn't going to be available. My dad thought wasn't going to be available in predominantly Black communities, but they did not remove us from the Black community. They just exposed us to something new. And then she tapped into the talents of like in the gifts within each one of her children. I often laugh and say, I'm your favorite child, mommy. I know I am. And my dad, I would say, I'm your best daughter. And he's like, yes, honey, you are. But really what they were saying was, I love you uniquely. And the unique things that make you, that God put in you, I want the world to see and experience. So I have to nurture those things and bring them out. And you have to know that I will always have your back, that your back is never up against the wall because my hand is always pushing you forward. And with that, it taught me to go into rooms that didn't look like me. Yeah, I was terrified at some point, but it taught me to break that barrier so I could stop being afraid. It taught me to not be afraid to enter into a room. And when you see that you're the only one, invite a friend. And that inviting that friend did not mean that I was going to have anything less. It meant that we would be able to change an atmosphere and I could do less of the work in changing the atmosphere. And so I think it's this thing of being able to reach across society. Like my work in DEI really started from racist comments that happened in a company that I was a leader in. And someone told me that I was the token chosen one. And I was like, I'm going to tell you that I'm not token, but I am chosen. And so it was making sure that that person and I became friends. I wanted to understand, where does that behavior come from? Like, why do you think that? And he began to educate me on his lived experience. And his lived experience really did support why he thought I was that, token chosen one. But I told him, if you just live in your bubble, that is the only knowledge you're ever going to have. And I would venture to say, you're going to start sounding plain and simple stupid. Don't be stupid, be broad. Because you serve a very diverse team, you serve a very diverse organization that has very diverse customers, and you work in sales. If you want to be effective, you need to understand who your market is. And that starts with you yourself being able to understand what that market looks like, what that market needs. So I taught him about the value, the business value that came from DEI. I taught him about how lived experiences changes products. It changes what you begin to research and what you begin to think about. And because of that, my career started to grow, but I started to educate one who had influence over thousands. And so that experience led to better experiences. And it also led me to see that while my value in corporate America as a business leader was important, my calling was to change atmospheres. And so I began to shift my own career and leverage the place from where I stood to create opportunities for others. And that wasn't just Black people. That was create opportunities where the gaps were. And that's the difference. And I think that's where DEI began to fail. We took what we thought was, and are, I don't want to denounce systemic barriers, they exist, but we didn't correlate those barriers and drive the business value for how removing those barriers were going to help companies. So what we did was, we took, I need one of you and two of you and three of you, and that makes us diverse. Well, if we all have the same lived experience, all three of us have different cultures, but we all have the same lived experience. We are one community, then we only offer one perspective. That's not what grows the business. I want your perspective. I want that person's perspective. I want this person who comes from privilege, this person who comes from poverty, and this person who is from middle of the road. And I want you to create something that has never been created before. You start in the middle.
Right. So let me jump back in here. I tell you, so I've written something down here that is an observation that I have about you. And it is that you possess infectious leadership power. That's what I'm experiencing with you right now. I'm like, how did I not know this, sister, before? Right? You have infectious leadership power. And part of my desire would be to put as many people in front of you as possible, because I know that you're going to be a good steward over their development. You said that my calling is to change atmospheres. Now, when I hear somebody say that, I hear that on two levels. One level, I hear it on sort of a spiritual level.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that that's what God has created us to do, is to change atmospheres. I know that my superpower is not simply the study that I've done, the experiences that I've had, the work that I've done, the expertise. That's not my superpower. My superpower is my faith and relationship with God, and the fact that he's called me to demonstrate his love in the world. So
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, in the midst of confusion, in the midst of opposition and anger and frustration and backlash and pushback, my true north is that I'm called to love people. And that's
Mm-hmm.
not just theoretically. That means I
Yeah.
absolutely love you in ways that are disarming. I feel that about you. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that so in the olden days, we had the media would dial into a Dr. King or Malcolm X or Jesse Jackson, and we had the one leader, and, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and we got mad about that because we said we're more than just one leader. So
Right.
they said, okay, we agree with you. And now you don't see any of us enough to ever rise to the level of leader.
Mm-hmm.
So now we lack any focal points. And so we don't seem to have a convener, if you will. And I see you, and certainly there are a lot of yous. You're not common by any, imagination. You're not common. You're extraordinary, but we don't see you. And as a result of that, we miss out on that. What has been your road to get to Chief Diversity Officer?
I think for me, it was starting off being, one of the only ones, understanding, what my purpose and calling was, both professionally and personally, and having those two align. So at one point, I used to have, this professional persona and then a personal persona, but I realized I'm not two individuals split into one. So it was that
Okay.
maturity and wisdom coming into bring your whole self into the atmosphere. Don't bring your work self and your private self. Bring your whole self, but understand the atmospheres that you're in. So while I may bring my whole self into PagerDuty, I do understand I'm at work. And so there is a level of that persona that comes. And when I started to understand that and bring that persona, both my personal and professional, together, I saw my career start to elevate. And I had a friend that was a work
Hold
friend.
on. I'm sorry. Slow that down again. Tell us about personal and professional. You just said that as though the people gonna get that. What does that actually mean? Sort of tying in your personal and professional persona, because it sounds to me that you have some boundaries that you create and use some wisdom, maybe some emotional intelligence, cultural, competence in order to tie those together.
Did I lose you?
Yeah, we're seeing you frozen. You
Oh,
came
no.
back.
Okay. So you talked about the bound, told me to dig a little bit deeper into that. So essentially, growing up, you were taught, your parents or my parents taught me like how I should exist in did I lose you again?
No, we're here.
Oh, okay.
I'm here.
Okay. My parents spoke to me about, how you act when you come to work. Again, your experiences. And then corporate America showed me how you're supposed to act via your company mission and vision and your core values. I had a difficult time compartmentalizing that into one. And so I was like at this toss and turn. Who am I at work? Who am I at home? And my faith is the thing that brought me to an understanding of what my calling was. And so I believe that when I came to realize that, and I came to understand that the way I solve problems is through prayer. Now, the way you may solve problems is through analyzing. But for me in my house, that's how I solve my problems. That created a gift in me that I think that was valuable in corporate America. So I use that gift to invite others in to find their own way to solve their problem. So I'm not going to push my ideology or my beliefs on you. I want you to explore what makes you you. And when I find what makes you you, I want you to share that with me because your you impacts me. And so I started to use that and cultivate that. But there wasn't a job description for that. Back then,
Right.
having emotional intelligence was frowned upon. And I said, well, I'm going to be different. Because what I'm not going to do now that I found me, I'm not going to lose who I am and what I'm supposed to be doing in this world because a paycheck tells me I'm supposed to fit this job description. I'm going to keep finding opportunities, keep creating opportunities until I find the one that sticks. And so I worked for a telecommunications firm. I then decided, you know what, in the midst of September 11th, I'm going to start my own entertainment company. I did that for a while. So I kept iterating on what I believed was my calling and jumping from different verticals to different verticals. Again, thirsty for difference, thirsty for variety, thirsty for diversity, but always remaining who I was. And I got to an information security platform and I was like, this couldn't be any more rigid than rigid could be, but I'm like, okay, let me figure out what's going on. But what I realized is there was no diversity there. And so that organization really did see this bright light that came in that was very different, that was very different from their culture, but very welcoming of their experience.
Information security platform. So you're gonna have to bring this down to a 6th grade education. These papers. And what does that mean for the average person in our audience? What is that?
So you probably deal with this organization and you don't realize it, but they store your information. So data centers, documents, there's physical documentation, all of our, I won't name the company, but all of our Social Security documents are held in a bunker 2 miles underneath sea level with this organization. Very complex, very high level office, but literally the Social Security office has a bunker 2 miles below sea level at their facility site. And so they deal with storing high level documentation from the September 11th crash is there. If you think of the world's most protected assets and information, this organization stores them.
Right. So how did you find your way there?
Yeah, you know what? I was working.
Here you are going down, and then all of a sudden here you are in the information security platform.
I was working in with my entertainment platform, and someone had come to one of the talks that I was giving and said, "You are amazing." And the first thing I do when I say that, I almost get childlike because I'm like, me? You think I'm amazing? Like, I think there are so many other interesting people in the world, but I'm humbled by that because it's not me. I believe that it's the gift that was put inside of me to share with the world. And so she's like, well, I want you to bring that gift to our organization. And I was like, really? But she said, oh, in Rancho Cucamonga, California. So if you can imagine, Rancho Cucamonga is primarily industrial, is warehouses. And I was like, oh, clench my pearls. I don't work in warehouses. Like, I was just like, that's not what I went to, school for all these years. But again, humility is a powerful tool. And my parents always taught me, don't ever think you're better than. There's value in every situation that you walk into. And so I said, okay, if I'm being called to go back into corporate America, all right, Lord, if you want me to start in an empty warehouse, I'll start in an empty warehouse and build it into something. And so I started in an empty warehouse as a managing director. And my job was to work with the sales team to fill that facility out. And I had 3 years to 36 months to do that. We achieved success in 18 months, and we did it through a diversity strategy. And so it was one of those things where people saw the value, but I saw the uniqueness and the talent that we needed to bring in to fill that facility up. There were people in the warehouse, there were people in sales. All those people had different personas, but all of those individuals, I taught that you bring a necessary skill set to the table. I'm just the strategist, but you know what I can't do? I can't think of Six Sigma. Like that's not my thing, right? But you do. So if I have the strategy, but you have the Six Sigma process, together we're more powerful than just my strategy.
Right.
And so it was placing value in people who did physical labor. It was placing value in people who had the gift of influence and worked in sales. It was placing value in people who had the gift in service, and our customer service team and our account management team. And everybody understood where their value was and that they were not left out. They were one component of a larger strategy.
Okay, let's go back. So I want you to, what entertainment company did you have? What were you doing in that entertainment company? And then did you pivot from there back to PageDuty? And then what was the work that you were doing there? Because people, I just want to make sure that they're
okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. So I worked. I owned my own entertainment firm. I did legal and marketing strategies, and
Okay.
so a lot of that was working with a lot of top entertainers. I've had the pleasure of working with Snoop Dogg. I had the pleasure of working with Floetry. A lot of Chingy when he first came out. So I worked primarily with Priority Capital Records, and that fueled a lot of the work that I was doing. And then I had another opportunity to work with the city of Long Beach. And so I started getting, again, those diverse perspectives, but I was feeling like there was something more for me to do. And so I started speaking more. And the more I began to speak, the more I got contacts in other verticals. When this opportunity at Iron Mountain came, I was almost subject not to take it because it was so very different from the legal and the business side that I've been working on. But again, I think when you're called, if you're smart, you answer. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go into this sector. And at Iron Mountain, I came across this individual that worked at the Rancho Cucamonga facility, and he committed suicide at work. He told me goodbye, and he walked out the door, and he ended his life. And after that, and Andy didn't look like me. Andy's white, grew up in Northern California. I think that was the commonality. We both grew up north. But I said that Andy was my brother from another mother. We connected on so many different levels. And Andy poured into me operational excellence. So I can run a Six Sigma facility because of the mentorship and the sponsorship that Andy got from me. Now, I came in with a legal and marketing background, and I said, wow, this individual poured all this into me. So I now have to give it back to the organization. But how do I do that? And I was like, you know what? I'm going to create employee resource groups. I'm going to create a sense of connection and sense of belonging. I'm going to frame that in a strategy so that people understand how to duplicate it and how to scale it. And then that launched my DEI career at Iron Mountain because we received success in 18 months when we were projected to receive success in 36 months.
Now what was the work that the people were doing sort of in the...
It was selling information. It was selling information management solutions. So we did physical archiving, we did digital archiving, and we did vault storage. So essentially it's a storage company, but it's a information management company. And so that was very different from, entertainment. And I was just thinking how do I navigate around? But I love business, and I love people, and I love creating strategies. And so I use that strategy. The CEO, they were going through a lot of change within their business model. And they were primarily, when they started off, a physical document company. But everyone that had come from, again, that diversity coming from other verticals understood that the digital transformation was on its way. And so they were influencing that primarily physical business model to change and to become digital. And so I was one of those individuals that was coming from a digital platform because I came from entertainment. So you can see I brought that skill set from entertainment into a very different environment. I created diversity of thought and diversity of experience and leveraged that in my career, never forgetting where I came from to bring the people along with me, because that's where your credibility as a leader comes in. So you create that connection, you create that belonging, you walk in truth and authenticity, but you take people where they otherwise would not go. And I think that's the missing component in today's society. People want the notoriety, but you're not taking the people with you. You're taking yourself with you. And so
Well,
So as I did,
we see that all the time in our communities, that unfortunately the businesses of color that the chambers have invested in, or that corporate America has invested in, those individuals begin to think that somehow they did it by themselves. And
yeah,
they run ahead by themselves, and sometimes they even shut the door behind them.
yeah,
And they don't realize that that isolation is going to be costly. And
hmm
ultimately, when they come for you, there will be nobody there for you. So, what
yeah.
do you see then as what do you see as the state of DEI right now? What is the forecast? What is the relevance? Is it on life support? Will it survive, but under a new brand? What do you see?
So I had this conversation with a leader in my company, PageDuty, on Friday. DEI will never go away because we're a diverse world. Like
Right, right,
we're not
right,
a homogeneous world, right? I think what we have to do is really think about what you touched on earlier. What's the most important experience in your organization? The one you're having. Look
right.
at yourself. Stop comparing what's going on with other people. First, take a look inward, both individually, as a team, and as an organization. Who are we aspiring to be? What impact are we trying to make for our customers and for our stakeholders? And how are you going to leave a legacy within the community? When we start really unfolding all of that, then we'll understand that DEI could never go away, but you cannot be exclusionary. At
Right.
PagerDuty, we lead with inclusion. You have to have inclusion. I stop people in their track, white, black, Asian, Latin, you name it. If you say you are the majority, you don't matter, I stop that conversation right then and there because we matter. You
That's right.
matter. I don't
Right.
care if you're that have the most what I believe is extreme persona or the most what I believe is the most connection. Your opinion still matters. And I think when we start looking at equity and filling the gaps of equity and producing equitable outcomes, we will see diversity, equity, and inclusion change. We really need to hone in on what that means. Does that mean for one organization, if you're a global organization and you aren't thinking globally, you're not serving your market. If you are a state organization and all you're serving is California and all of your impact is coming from California, then yeah, you think on a state level. But the internet has opened the world to us. Social media has opened the world to us. So if you want to grow, and I think it's safe to say that most organizations, companies start with growth in mind, then you have to have a growth mindset. That means that you have to think diverse. You're never going to get around diversity.
Right. So I'm giving you all kinds of terminology to explain who I see you as based upon the things that you're saying.
Okay.
So
I love it.
here's what I would say next then about you is that you have insights with a multiplier effect. In other words, you're able to see a stronger future. In other words, you have the ability to look at something that exists today and see how that can explode into something greater. That's powerful. You've said to us two things. You talked about the importance of this entrepreneurial worldview where you see opportunity everywhere, but then you are using it almost as an entrepreneur within organizations. So talk to us about what you see about the balance of us serving as entrepreneurs within corporations, the need for us to be in those roles, and also the need for us to be able to be entrepreneurs. And I'm sorry, but I don't think that most entrepreneurs have that multiplier effect that you have, that they're entrepreneurs, but they don't see gold everywhere.
Well, I think so. I'll touch on your last component. I think sometimes you have a good idea that is not hasn't been operationalized and hasn't been built to scale.
Right.
You simply have a good idea, and other people like your idea. So then you
Right.
start trying to produce your idea, but one of the things my CEO, Jennifer Tejada, explained to us about what your role is. If you are sitting at a C-suite, then you should be thinking 3 to 5 years in advance. So if I'm not thinking as a multiplier, I'm not doing my job. So I have to remain future forward. So if you are in a position where you are a entry level, your job is to be tactical. Your job is to learn be the CEO of everything tactical. It's not to diminish your role, but it's to know you where your scope and your focus should be. If you are a first time people manager, your job is to look at the first 1 to 6 months to maybe a year, depending on what your managerial remit is. If you're a director, you should be looking at 1 to 3 years ahead. You should be thinking about what is your VP or what is your senior manager or senior director giving you that then you need to take and multiply. Now, here's why it all makes sense. Because if the tactical people are giving you the day-to-day and the mid-level people are giving you the year or the month to the year and so on and so forth, everybody's managing the future.
Right.
I can't look down and give you tactical expertise because I should be looking 3 to 5 years in advance. So I rely on my team to have a safe space that I create for them to tell me what good looks like today. I need my directors to tell me what good looks like in a year. I need my VPs to tell me what good looks like in 2 to 3 years, so I can formulate my strategy for what is 3 to 5 years. You don't work alone. We all work in an ecosystem. And I think that if we take that and we build that into that entrepreneur, then you can see where this is going. If you don't do that, then you lose part of the effect. So then you become both the owner and the operator, the entrepreneur and the intrapreneur, and everybody's lost their focus. Let's refocus. Let's look at what we need to do and figure out what role you want to play. There's room at the table for everyone. You just have to feel powerful in the role that you play. Understanding you master that, more is to come. But you can't be given more if you don't master what you already have.
Okay,
and I think that's the problem.
So let me throw this at you now. The truth of the matter is, this is just the truth of the matter.
What is the truth of the matter?
The truth of the matter is that you are a rare flower in the world of chief diversity officers.
Oh,
unfortunately, there are not that many people that see the business as clearly as you see it, and then see the diversity's linkage to the successful delivery of that business. So my question is, if diversity, and I'll suggest to you that it's almost by design, that many of the chief diversity officers were not entrepreneurial thinkers. They were not business leaders that then can bring strategy and business strategy to DEI. They were placeholders that were there to do the performative things of diversity councils, ERGs, and a 30-minute training online.
Let me tell you something about that too. This just dropped into my mindset. So for those of you that are on the call, wondering like how I came to be or how my career took flight, I leveraged social media. I leveraged LinkedIn. I researched individuals who were doing what I wanted to do, but doing it at higher levels. So I reached out to Libra Clemens at Twilio. I followed Melody Hobson. I looked at Verna Myers. I researched Jennifer Tejada. I, looked at Grace Clemens. You have to find who you want to be in someone else, and then and niche that into who you are. Take a part of them, take a part of another person. My old mentor at Iron Mountain was phenomenal. Jeff Anthony is one of the premier business leaders that I know that have come into contact. And I created, whether it was virtual, whether it was self-infused mentorship and sponsorship opportunities. And I think that is key for anyone who is looking to take their career to the next level. You have to save you. You're not, there's not going to be someone that's going to come around and say, oh, I'm going to pick you up and I'm going to walk you through. You have to become an advocate for your career, an advocate for what you see your future becoming, and then an advocate for where you see your impact in your community. When you do that, then people will follow. That is what makes you a leader. And so I just felt encouraged to share that with someone. I don't know who that it might be speaking to, but it doesn't happen because you went to this school or that school. For some of us, it does. But for those of us who have to be more grassroots, those of us who have to take the resources that we have present day, use the tools for good that are amongst you, and don't be afraid to use them with people that don't look like you, because Jeff Anthony and I have two very different lived experiences. But that man who is, a middle-aged white man poured into me more than he even thinks that he knows. And he did it through some of the most adverse times. But I realized that adversity makes you stronger. Obstacles grow your superpower.
I would say, thank you for that. Obstacles grow your superpower? What?
Obstacles grow your superpower.
So I would say that it is pretty evident that you are good ground. And I think that's the first thing that we have to work on, is preparing ourselves to be ground worth planting something in. But I also like something else that you bring, and that's this huge degree of humility. And almost like my wife is this way, almost a blindness to the fullness of who you are. I don't think that you're completely blind to it, but you're blind from an arrogant standpoint. You're not puffed up with it. You recognize that you have an assignment and that you have some gifts and talents. But there's a overarching humility that says that I'm not simply just a teacher, I'm also a learner. Yes. And I'm a follower of what I believe my purpose is according to God. So if we were to look at what's in store for you for your future, you just blown through this hour. I mean, this is just a crime. I mean, this is ridiculous. You just blew through it. I mean, if I hadn't interrupted you a few times, you could have gone for 2 days saying,
you guys, sometimes I do have to be reeled back in. I will tell you, I love people. I love conversations. I'm very, very blessed. My life has been enriched with so many different experiences that others have not had the opportunity. I can tell you, just want to touch on my experience at PageDuty. I came to PageDuty 3.5 years ago with this drive to get back into corporate America and build these strategies and impact and create equitable experiences. But what I have gotten is so much greater than that. I have had the opportunity to sit at the feet of an amazing CEO, Jennifer Tejada. I have an amazing Chief Legal and People Officer, Shelley Webb, that have really sat with me and talked to me about what leadership looks like. And I have the pleasure of reporting to two amazing women. So, I have a female CEO. But what it's taught me is the true value of belonging. And I didn't realize that I too needed belonging. I didn't realize the power that belonging brings forth. And through that understanding and that sense of let me really sit in this and not sit in my title, but sit in the work that has to be done. I've had the experience of really looking at lived experiences that I've not had and being able to support them, being able to ally with them first, to recognize that I'm going to put the work in to understand what needs to take place, but you're going to educate me on what actually needs to come forth. I come with the perspective, but you school me on what the necessary components of the strategy needs to be. So again, it's that meeting in the middle of the road and being able to do that in an organization that, has 53 or 54.3% female VPs. That is unheard of in some organizations. We are 43.5% women within the US. So I am fortunate to be an influencer over those type of stats. Our board is, 55% women. So again, being able to sit amongst those stats, but still create equitable experiences, not just say it's just that. But what I'm really saying is we're a very diverse organization. We bring in diverse perspectives. We also look at where our gaps are and fill those in with what our customer needs. We lead with a champion the customer mindset. So our Operations Cloud platform is built on how do we create the most equitable, the most information fueled system for our customers to solve their biggest problems. And so being able to sit in that, to be exposed by those business strategies, but being heard as both a business leader and a people enthusiast has been one of the most rewarding situations that I've ever been in, to just call that's my job. I feel very, very blessed.
Well, let me tell you what I'd like to sort of talk to you further about. I'd love to be one of your business case studies, because I believe that back to that multiplier effect, I think that you have the ability to put a multiplier effect on anything that looks like a good ground. So anything that starts with good ground, I think that you have the ability, the wisdom to apply that multiplier effect. And so I believe that people like you and I and others, that we have to be developing this whole series of case studies around taking people that are good ground and showing them how to maximize more of who they are. And then I would say with a parallel scaling strategy.
Yeah.
Because as I look at our future as a people, so one you help one me, that's not enough. We can't get there that way. So it's one you with your wisdom and insights and still learning, then sort of make a case study out of integrity development, but then a parallel scaling strategy that says, okay, Eric, how do you do the same thing for others? So that and make it make sense so that we are attracting more people to this. In other words, the business case for DEIB is so strong that we don't have to beg people to do it. We have to demonstrate its value. And as we demonstrate its value in the marketplace, everybody comes. They don't come out of guilt. They don't come because they're supposed to. They come because there's gold in them, their heels.
Yes.
And I'm saying if I never meet you, or if you never decide to peel off some of that limited time that you have to invest in how we further build this, and then how I build back, I think that we don't get there.
Yeah. And I think that 100% you are correct. I think that you often have to seize certain opportunities and realize that time is limited, right? But how you use your time is essential.
That's right.
And, I thought about even this today. I said, it's Saturday morning. I've got 24 hours in this day. If I slept in, who would I not be able to connect with? But if I got up, what would I actually gain from this engagement? And so I think it's one of those things of going back to what you were saying, making sure you first seize that opportunity. Second, the thing I also heard you say is demonstrate. If you show people how you did it and you show them where the value is, you don't have to sell them anything, because everybody wants to move forward. I think it's the key thing is the demonstrating, and then the communicating what you've just done. And so making sure that you bring a strength that I don't have. I bring a strength that you don't have. Together, we'll create something even better. And then we then have to share that with the world. Now, there are going to be some people in the world that get it. They will multiply. There'll be some people that don't. But then that multiplying effect has to communicate what they've done so that the others don't get left behind. And I think that's the problem. I think that we and sometimes it's because we're just moving so fast, right? It takes time for us to do what we need to do, for us to then communicate that out. But I think if you really strategize and you build something scalable in the beginning, that as you start to multiply, you already have the platform for how you communicate it widely, how you operationalize it and make it a multiplier. And multipliers just don't, that concept is great, but the actionable strategies to put in place to make it grow have to really be thought about in the beginning, so that you're not creating and then and strategizing, creating and strategizing. You get the strategy right, you figure out how you scale it, and then you go do the work.
I love that. And so I'll say to you this, that what God has shown me is that when he gives us wisdom and insight on something, then we shouldn't be sitting back waiting on somebody else to do that. That we literally have to decide where we need to sort of plug ourselves in.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I'd say to you is that my character says that I never want people to invite people into something that's not consistent with what they believe they're supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't matter
Mm-hmm.
what I think. At the end of the day, I'm trying to align what I think with what a person sees in terms of their own value, their own purpose. I would say to you that you have an overwhelmingly uncommon set of insights that are a part of the key for us as a people group being able to reach our potential. And somebody has to be able to say, I see that in you. Sometimes we're also competitive around, I'm great. No, I'm great.
Yeah.
I'm a leader. That we don't sit back and say, hold up, she's got something that I haven't seen in a lot of other people. How do we make sure that we, first of all, celebrate that it exists in her? And then secondly, take advantage of it in ways that are mutually beneficial.
Yeah.
In other words, it adds energy back to her. So it sort of brings life back into her, but then it also can be used to help us make significant steps forward that won't happen in any other place. The government certainly can't do that. So I'd like us to think more about that. But this has been such a powerful conversation this morning. Are there any final words that you want to share with our community? I'm going to ask you to hold on after we sign off.
Okay. I think for me, understand that you are your biggest investment. And that if you don't believe that you bring value to this world, then you need to go and sit with yourself and figure out, where that's coming from and find that in yourself. I think for me as a leader, it is about, I think about my role as a chief diversity officer, and I always use this phrase. My job is to go out and shine the light. Now, I tend to go in areas where I feel that there is a gap or there's areas that need to be celebrated. The people who I'm shining the light on, it's their job to be the light. It is not my job to be your light. You need to be the most innovative, the most strategic, the most authentic you that you can be. So when I shine the light, the world sees you. They're not looking for me because I've already done my job, but you be the light that this world needs. And I feel that as a lover of people, as a lover of experiences, as a lover of opportunity, I want that for everyone. I want everyone to feel as though they belong. That their contribution to this world, that their contribution to their family, and their contribution to the legacy they want to leave, if they even recognize that they have a legacy to leave, whether they know it or not, is one of value. And so if you are not feeling valued today, I want to tell you that you are valued. And if you are feeling valued, I want you to share that value with someone else.
Well, this has been amazing. Community, this is going to be a show that you'll have to watch on repeat because it has been nothing but dropping gems and dropping mics the whole way. We've got a new friend now to Diversity Conversations, and I've got a new partner as well. Tommy, I know you're going to hate you missed today, man, but we're going to make sure that we create an opportunity for us all to reconnect. Community, I'm going to say to you, thank you for joining us today, and have a great week. And we'll look forward to you rejoining us next week for another installment of Diversity Conversations. Take care now.